Well, thank you very much. I apologize. I was landing in Seattle yesterday to come visit my sister who lives in Seattle with my 13-year-old son. And at the top of the escalator was a Cambodian who said, "Are you Brad Adams?" I said, "Yes." And then he said, "We are having our annual meeting and we would love you to come." So I'm sorry I don't have the right clothes and I don't have a prepared speech, but I am overjoyed to come here today and to meet all of you. I've been working in Cambodia for 25 years. I went to Cambodia in 1993 at the end of UNTAC and worked for the United Nations Human Rights Office for 4 years. And for 1 year, I advised the National Assembly working for the National Assembly Committee on Human Rights, led by Mr. Kem Sokha. And I became a very good friend of Kem Sokha, Sonchai. I hope you all remember my very good friend Rhapsody, who was killed. And so many journalists, people involved in the NGO community, my friends at places like Likado and Ad Hoc, many newspapers, and even, I should say, a large number of members of the CPP who, like me, think that Hun Sen has been taking Cambodia in the wrong direction for the entire time he's been in power. Now, we are at an extremely critical time for Cambodia. I think it is fair to say that we are watching a cold coup by Hun Sen. I lived through the 1997 hot coup, where Hun Sen used military force to overturn the UNTAC elections, to drive Ronarit out of power. And I am no fan of Ronarit, but that is not the way you change power. To force Sam Rainsy and Kem Sokha and Sonchai and many other people into exile. I was working for the United Nations Human Rights Office when we documented over 100 extrajudicial killings during that period. One of the many mistakes that the international community has made was to try to convince Hun Sen to allow everybody back into the country to participate in the 1998 elections, and they succeeded. But then not to hold Cambodia and Hun Sen to the same standard as elections everywhere else. And so we had the famous lie by Stephen Solars, who called 1998 a miracle on the Mekong, simply because the election happened. That election was not free, was not fair. We had, as I think many of you will remember, monks floating down the Tonle Basak in the Mekong having been killed. We had people who were buried in shallow graves in many parts of the country. I had working for the United Nations, had to go and identify some of those people. Handcuffed, blindfolded, stripped of their clothes, shot in the back of the head. And we were able to identify who did it. People like Chap Pickaday, who is now a very senior general in the military. We identified as far back as 1997 as having been responsible for ordering the executions of people he had taken into custody. And he's not only a senior member of the Army, but he is a very successful businessman who owns, has contracts, including with foreign companies, that have made him a millionaire. So what happened in 1998 was that the international community was so happy to end that conflict that they said, this election is good enough. And what I heard from that was it was good enough for Cambodia. It wouldn't have been good enough for the United States or France or Japan or any other democracy, but it was good enough because they didn't want to make the effort to do what they should have done, which is to insist on a free and fair election and not recognize a government that came from an illegitimate election that was not free and fair. Why do I tell you all this? Because I think we're in a very similar situation now. This is a cold coup that Hun Sen is conducting right now. That coup in 1997 was on the front pages of the New York Times and the Guardian and the Wall Street Journal. It was on CNN as the lead story. I remember it very well. It was on the BBC. It was global news. What's happening right now is not global news because it's being done in a very different way. Hun Sen has obtained control after fighting with his enemies inside the CPP, after the death of Chia Sim, who was not a good man, but was Hun Sen's enemy inside the party. Having sidelined Sarkang made him completely weak and incapable of doing anything on his own. Hun Sen now controls all institutions in Cambodia. And so he has decided that now is the time, because he cannot win the next election if it was a free and fair election. In fact, I'm convinced he lost the last election through cheating. I don't think there's any doubt about that. He has decided, because he can't find a way to win the next election, even with cheating, even controlling the National Election Committee, even controlling all media, even using bribes and other things to buy votes. He saw the results of the commune elections. He saw the response to the 2013 elections. He understands that the young people in Cambodia are not fans of his. They're sick and tired of seeing the same person on TV every day of their lives. They want change. They look around the world and they can see that other governments, other countries have better governments that are not corrupt, that aren't violent, that provide hope for their futures. And Hun Sen has decided he cannot win the next election. So he's carrying out a cold coup right now. He has forced Sam Rainsy into exile multiple times. He has now arrested Kem Sokha. Many members of parliament are either under arrest or being charged. Tun Sarai, my very good friend from Ad Hoc, has been living outside of Cambodia for over a year because he knows that if he goes back to Cambodia, he will be put into prison. And his health is such that he may not survive prison. We have no independent media in Cambodia now, except really for the Phnom Penh Post. He's closed VOA, he's closed RFA, and he is simply going to now dissolve the CNRP and hand their seats to other parties, which is completely illegal. And he's going to hope that there's no response. And the reason I am speaking to you today is because there must be a response. There must be a very response. And that response has to be from every possible corner. You know, the most important response is on the ground in Cambodia. Cambodians are going to have to stand up to this. I have been surprised that the CNRP and others have not allowed people, not encouraged, but even allowed people to raise their voices and to engage in public protests. They've told them not to. I think that when you have a cold coup, there must be some demonstration of public disapproval. There must be some public reaction. I don't want anyone to get hurt, but I believe it's possible for people to show this, because I can tell you that many people in the diplomatic community are saying, what's the response of the Cambodian people? We know what the response of their leaders is. We don't know what people are thinking. And I can promise you that the gutless people who run institutions like the UN and the World Bank and the State Department and the Japanese Foreign Ministry, they will be happy to say, look, the Cambodian people aren't doing anything. Maybe they don't really mind this. Now, I know that's not true at all. I am quite certain that in a free and fair election, that Hun Sen wouldn't have a chance. I have no doubt about that. And people who know Cambodia well also have no doubt about that. But people who don't know Cambodia well, who are making decisions at the tops of governments in the UN, they don't know that. Second, in addition to people power, we need to get the important players outside of Cambodia to be on the same page. Right now, they are all following the Rohingya crisis in Burma. They're talking about the North Korea nuclear crisis. So the people who are responsible for foreign policy, look looking at Asia, say, look, yeah, what's happening in Cambodia is really bad, but we have to worry about these other things. How do we get them to take Cambodia seriously? Well, here's what I think you need to remind people. The international community has spent about $25 billion in Cambodia in the last 25 years. They have made a huge investment. You should be telling your elected representatives that they are about to flush $25 billion down the toilet. That money is being completely wasted. And taxpayers in the United States and other countries will care about that message. They can't stand by as this incredible effort that's been made over the years is completely wasted. Second, the United States is the only country that can lead an international response on this. I urge you to deluge the State Department and the White House and senior members of Congress with messages about how bad the situation is in Cambodia and what must be done about it. It still matters a lot to the State Department, the White House, and elected members to hear from people, to get a sense. You should mount a campaign, an email campaign, change.org, Avaz. There's so many different ways to mount campaigns. You should share the email addresses and telephone numbers of key people like Senator McCain, Senator Lindsey Graham, Representative McGovern, Steve Chabot, Representative Chabot, so many people. They need to hear from you every day. Bombard them. You will never write too many emails or make too many phone calls. Don't think, oh, I might be disturbing them. No, you're getting your message across if you will contact them. Over and over again, you cannot, United States, fail to take a leadership role in Cambodia, given your history in this country, good and bad. Right? The U.S. still has a lot to be responsible for and a lot to be sorry for in Cambodia, as well as the good things the United States has done in recent years. I'm telling you to focus on the U.S. because unless the U.S. is 100% on board, we will not see change in Japan. We will not see a more aggressive role by the European Union. We will not even see a much stronger role from the United Nations. We need the United Nations Secretary General to get involved. He will not do that without a push from the United States. I am absolutely certain of this. So concentrate your efforts on the United States every day. I don't know who's organizing things for you, but organize it. Get the phone numbers and email addresses. Talk to every single one of the members of your family. So every different person who contacts them is important. If you've got 5 people in your family, all 5 of you should be making the phone calls and writing to them. We want them to see a wave of concern so that they react. Because I am certain that the United States and other countries will react. If Hun Sen dissolves the CNRP, if he recreates a 1980s kind of one-party state where there's just some fake parties in the National Assembly and there's a completely one-party media and one-party state, there will be consequences. You know, Hun Sen, you should know this. You will lose in the long run. There will be sanctions. There will be travel bans. There will be asset freezes. There will be disruptions of trade relationships. All this will happen. But we need that to happen before the damage is done, not after. That's our challenge now, is to mobilize everybody we can mobilize so that that message gets across and those actions happen sooner than later. If they happen after July 2018, after we have a de facto one-party state, after we have fake elections, it is much harder to recreate a quasi-democracy. That's all Cambodia's ever had under Hun Sen, is a quasi-democracy. It's never been a democracy. Every time I read that Cambodia is an emerging democracy, I want to call up the journalists and say, what are you talking about? Nothing emerging. It's a fight every day in Cambodia to try to have some kind of democracy. But you still have some of this left from the Paris agreements. And if we wait until after July 2018, we will have nothing. We'll be starting from zero. we'll be having a different kind of year zero in Cambodia. And it's very, very hard then to make the progress that we need to. Okay, I'm a human rights professional. I need to talk about human rights for a minute. The number one issue we have in Cambodia is impunity. And related to that is the CPP's control of the court system. When I went to Cambodia in 1993 as a younger lawyer, I was working to implement the article of the Cambodian Constitution which calls for an independent judiciary. And I worked with members of Parliament to propose laws that would create that. So there would be a real constitutional council that was independent of the CPP. There would be a real Supreme Council of the Magistracy with professionals that was independent of the CPP. And we failed because Hun Sen realized from the first day, as all dictators do, if you lose control of the courts, you will lose power. As much as you have to control the army, you have to control the courts. So in my public messaging, I am always talking about the fact that the courts are an organ of the CPP, and that the courts are simply taking orders from Hun Sen, and that the courts, that for Cambodia to make progress on human rights and democracy, we must have independent courts. Do I think by saying this is going to happen overnight? No. But this is the message you must also send to everybody you talk about when you talk about Cambodia. Because most people who are influential in Cambodia internationally don't know the details of Cambodia. So we get stupid statements from governments sometimes, like the Japanese government, saying, well, we want them to respect the rule of law. We'll see how the trial comes out. There's no rule of law. There's no trial. These aren't trials. A trial has an independent judge and a professional prosecutor and the right of a defense attorney to work with his or her client, to provide witnesses, to make those witnesses come in and face cross-examination. You know all this, right? We don't have that in Cambodia ever. It's a joke. But we have to explain this over and over again to the diplomats of Japan or France or people in the United Nations because we haven't sufficiently educated them. Because when they hear the word court, their picture is of a court in their country. That's not what this is. A court in Cambodia is simply an arm of the CPP. It's like attending a CPP meeting. The judges in Cambodia have to follow CPP rules. They attend CPP party meetings. In 1997, I was able to persuade, when I was working for the United Nations, CEROC to agree to have a rule in the political parties law that said that judges cannot be members of a political party and cannot attend political party meetings. CEROC agreed to that. And he sent the draft law to Hun Sen, and Hun Sen took his pen and went like this to that article. And that is one of the reasons we are where we are today. I say this, by the way, not because I think that CEROC now remains a reformer or ever was, but I think it's important for you also all to remember that there will be people in the CPP who also agree with you. I have met over the years and come to know many senior members of the CPP who despise Hun Sen. They don't like him. If there was a free and fair election in the CPP, Hun Sen would lose. And so we all have to also work hard to find those people. Because I think that Hun Sen has gone too far. I think that most people in the CPP do not want to go back to the 1980s. The 1980s was a terrible time for Cambodia. And for most people in the CPP, they were in Cambodia, subject to trade restrictions, subject to an embargo, couldn't travel, couldn't send their kids to universities abroad, didn't have cash to have a decent life. And all of this Hun Sen is putting at risk. Yeah. Hun Sen may seem like the strong man, but he's a weak man. Hun Sen is doing this from a position of weakness, not a position of strength. Hun Sen is doing this all. Sen is tearing down the fabric of Cambodia because he can't find any other way to stay in power. So he will use bullets instead of ballots. He will use force instead of persuasion. And he will burn the country down before he will resign. People around him, inside the CPP, inside the army, and inside the police, will not want everything that they have to be put at risk to preserve Hun Sen's power. And so bridges have to be built with many of those people so that they see that the future for them does not involve a one-party state led by a violent criminal thug who's been in power for 32 years. And I think all right, well, thank you very much. I think you probably all know that I love your country. I am obsessed with trying to make Cambodia a better place. I can't say that I feel the pain that you feel the same way. You're Cambodians and I'm not. You suffer. Your families suffer. Your children suffer. Your parents, your relatives, you all suffered from the corruption and the violence and the misrule of the country. But I feel as much as I can, and my colleagues at Human Rights Watch and our friends at Amnesty International and our friends in the UN system, you should know that there are so many of us who care deeply about Cambodia and will fight as long as it takes for you to choose your government. I simply look forward to the day when there is a free and fair election where Cambodians decide their future. If you vote for Hun Sen, I would think, I don't know what you're doing, why you would do that, but that would be your choice. All right? I want you to have the same chance I have as an American, as many of you have now as American citizens as well, or Australians, or wherever you're from, to choose your own, to be in charge of your own future. And that's what we must fight for every single day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Adams. Is it possible that you stay for extra 5 to 10 minutes? Well, some of us want to take a picture with you and ask some questions.
I'm happy to stay for. I have to leave in about an hour.
Okay. Oh. Okay. One question. Short. One would ask something. Okay.
How about this? Yeah, please ask him question. Okay, whatever the burning question you have, and make your question short. Okay, so because other people can ask questions.
Question, not comment.
Hello, Mr. Brad Adams. You talked about the monks killed and all that. I was the leader of the monk in 1998. Okay, but I thank you very much for the wonderful suggestions. Now, we want to hear from you again. We heard that Hun Sen is making a deal with Sun Chai on behalf of CNRP. If he accepts the presidency, Hun Sen will not dissolve the CNRP. So, if that is true, what is your suggestion? And if it's not true, what is your suggestion? What CNRP should do? Thank you.
Yeah, well, so it's very clear that whoever is the president of the CNRP will end up in prison. And I think it's, I think Sun Chai is a very smart guy. I've known Sun Chai for years. It's also one of the funniest people I've ever met in politics. I don't think that anyone in the CNRP would be naive enough to think that they can make a deal with Hun Sen where Hun Sen would keep the deal. At this point, it's very clear he wants to decapitate CNRP. So anyone who wants to put their head on the shoulders of CNRP will lose their head, figuratively or literally. So, and I know that Musakua, who's also someone I know very well, has said this, and I'd be very surprised if anybody in CNRP was gullible enough to think that they could be the leader of the party and then that they would be allowed to continue to operate the party and participate in the elections 100% and have free and fair elections. So I would, if Sunshine was here, I would urge him to think twice if he's really considering that. Let me just say, I'm not a CNRP supporter. I'm a CNRP member. It's not my job. We don't, at Human Rights Watch, support individual political parties or politicians. So I don't think it's my job to tell CNRP what to do or not. I'm not their strategist. But I made my comments about Sunshine because this would apply to any political party, any opposition party in Cambodia that tries to make a deal with Hun Sen in these circumstances, unless there's, for instance, like international support, involvement, unless they sign it as well, is, I think, making a very dangerous decision and taking too big a chance, and they will lose. There's no deal. I don't remember Hun Sen ever keeping a promise he kept.
Yeah. Thank you. My name is Suphan. I am the president for Committee for Election Rights of Overseas Cambodians. So we are advocating for rights to vote of Cambodian overseas, that altogether about 3 million people. And thank you very much for your moving and articulative statement about human rights and elections and democratization in Cambodia. My question is about what you mentioned about the independent judiciary system in Cambodia. This is a big issue in Cambodia. And you proposed some articles and you failed. So you think under the current 55 members of the National Assembly from CNRP and also from other mechanisms, could we try our best to enforce that article to be in action so that Hun Sen cannot abuse his power anymore? Thank you.
That's a great question. You may remember that on March 30th, 1997, the demonstration that led to the grenade attack on Sam Rainsy was about the judiciary. It was a very quiet Sunday morning. It seemed like it was just one of many demonstrations. I was there right afterwards, 5 minutes after it happened, and it was one of the most terrible things I've ever seen in my life. And I thought afterwards, why did they do this on this morning? And there are many reasons. They wanted to kill Sam Rainsy for sure. They wanted to silence the KNP. But they also did not want the public to become mobilized in favor of an independent judiciary, because they know that their power and their corrupt money is at risk if there are truly independent and professional judges. Do I think the CPP will allow a draft law in the National Assembly to pass, changing anything about the judiciary? No chance. No chance. I wouldn't waste my time thinking about passing a bill. I would propose a bill if I were a Cambodian NGO or a legal organization or political party. I would be drafting bills and putting them on the internet for the public to see. Here's what our vision is for a democratic Cambodia, which includes an independent judiciary. Here's how we would select judges. Here's how we would change the Constitutional Council and the Supreme Council of Magistracy. Here's who we would not allow. We would not allow members of political parties who are elected. We have had members of the CPP Standing Committee in charge of the Supreme Council of Magistracy. There's no chance that that person could ever discipline judges for allowing impunity or corruption or taking instructions from the government. So I think there's a lot that you can do, and also you can educate the public while you're doing that. And you can educate in foreign ministries around the world while you're doing it. Share that with them. Show that you're serious about reform. don't just say what you're against, show what you're for. I think that would make a big difference.
So, I have a question to Mr. Brad. Thank you very much for your hard work in saying Cambodians in 1993. So, my question is not Hun Sen not stepped down because it has very strong backup China recently, everybody knows. So, what the next step the U.S. and international community with UN will do for the Hun Sen government? Thank you.
It's a very important question. It's one of the most important questions. Well, why is Hun Sen doing this now? Why didn't he do it 5 years ago when he wanted to, or 10 years ago? He's always wanted to do this. He's always wanted to get rid of the opposition. He has never accepted, right through from UNTAC until today, he's never accepted the idea of an opposition that can operate legally in Cambodia. That's very clear. He's never accepted the idea of NGOs and civil society that criticizes the government. He's never accepted the idea of an independent media. I think it's very clear. The reason is that China is a rising power, is now a global power, and China has made it very clear that they would support any dictator or autocrat in the region if they decide to rule by force. And so Hun Sen thinks that whatever he does, he will be protected by China. Let me just point out that China, when it misbehaves in the region, is very unpopular. You can look at many countries around the region where public opinion is turning against China because of the way China is behaving. And the biggest and best example is just west of Cambodia in Burma. The main reason that Aung San Suu Kyi is now in power and that the military allowed there to be free and fair elections is because China was too active and had too big a footprint in Burma. The army in Burma thought, if we have China's support, we can stay in power forever. And that ended up backfiring. People in Burma were saying, we have simply become the 19th province of China. I heard that so many times in Burma. We are tired of China getting all the benefits. You know that when you hear that China is giving assistance to Cambodia, it's almost always a loan. They're not handing money to Cambodia to make Cambodia a better place. They're loaning money to Cambodia at high interest rates. And you know what? Your children are going to have to pay that back. So in Burma, they figured that out a couple years ago. And the public turned against the generals in Burma and said, we don't want this. We do not want to be a province of China. We don't want a dictatorship telling our dictatorship how we should live. We want to be a free, independent, sovereign country. And so I don't think the China card will work for very long. It is working right now, but as I said, if Hun Sen goes too far and dissolves every structure that's been created since the Paris agreements, there will be a backlash. And I believe it will happen on the ground in Cambodia, and it will happen internationally, and he will not be able to rely only on China.
Okay, thank you. Now I invite Mr. Chanbut, please come here. Okay. Please come close to Mr. Allen. Jonathan, please take one picture with him. Okay. Camera, if you change your mind, you're welcome. You have a few minutes. Are you or not? Okay. Huh? Lynn? You want it? Okay. All right. Okay. Camera, are you ready or not? Okay, good. Okay. Thank you. We have to kind of stop